over, Dave, one of the, actually I was going to kind of mention in the very first talk, it didn't really go to it too much because we weren't able to start according to the battle plan. But basically, it's the mystery of we call it the negative mystery of tradition, or the negative mystery of the faith, not just of tradition. And the idea is that, why are we here? And it has to be said that a first practical reason why we're here is because there's something wrong where we're supposed to be. So the normal situation is that as a Catholic, I am in my local Catholic parish. And I'm receiving the faith, living the faith, preparing to die in the faith, and spread the faith in the parish. And here the local parish, St. Benedict's, just a couple miles from here. And this is where we're supposed to live the faith. But there's a problem. Why are we called traditional Catholics in our little chapels throughout the world, in the SSPX and the other independent chapels? We're not here purely for positive reasons. It actually begins with a negative reason. We're here because of a problem in the church. If the problem isn't there, then we don't need to be in a little hut in Boston, Kentucky. We don't need to be in a Holiday Inn. We don't need to be even in a big chapel that was built without the permission of the diocese, where we have them throughout the world. We're here because of something negative. The bishop, who's supposed to help me get to heaven, is helping us get to hell. The bishop, who is supposed to be communicating the Catholic faith, is not communicating it. He is in fact communicating confusion and modernism. Therefore, I have to step away from the bishop, because he's endangering our souls. And that is how Catholic tradition began in the 1960s and 1969, 1970. We should just be going to Latin Mass and teaching the Catholic faith along with every other Catholic. We should all be fighting the devil and modernism along with every other Catholic. But when the other Catholics, and particularly the ones in authority, reject the Catholic faith, therefore we have to stand apart. That is why when you go to someone, why are you going to the Latin Mass? Well, because the new Mass is bad. We don't just go to the Latin Mass because the Latin Mass is good. We also go to it because the new Mass is bad. If the new Mass was also good, and the Pope clearly wants us to go to the new Mass, and there's no doubt about that, and the Bishop wants us to go to the new Mass, and there's no doubt about that, we would have to go to it. The only reason we don't go there is because it's bad. Well, that's the principle, the negative mystery, and the negative principle of Catholic tradition. We're here because there's something bad there. We want to be good, but we've got to fight the evil, and unfortunately there's something evil amongst our fellow soldiers who are supposed to be wearing the same uniform that we do. That's the principle of Catholic tradition. Now, 40 years later, what do we discover? Why are we here in this Camp Crescendo? Why are we, once again back at Holiday Inns? Why are we saying Mass in Winona, or the people call us to go to Winona, and we're saying Mass? I said the first Mass in Winona, right across the hill from the seminary, from Mrs. Rader's house. And 40 people there. And, because that was the place we had to go to say the Mass. Why are we doing that? Because there's something wrong. So we need to understand what that something wrong is. Just like you have to explain in the overall battle of the Novus Ordo versus the traditional, you've got to be able to explain what's wrong with the new Mass. What's wrong with the modernist teaching in the church today. Therefore, we must stand against it, and even if the bishop doesn't approve, we have to stand for the Catholic faith, even if they've got the churches, like St. Athanasius said, they have the church, we have the faith. Well, that principle is the true principle of the faith. It's always been true. It's also true today. So we've got to have we have to have an understanding what has gone wrong in the SSPX, what has gone wrong in the new modernist direction of this tradition, and why we have to do what we're doing. In order to do that, we have to be able to show some of the things that are incorrect in the present hierarchy of the society, show how it is against the faith, and a danger to the faith, or a danger to the faith, either one, and therefore we have to resist. And so Father is going to go ahead and go through some examples and give it to you. And one of the unfortunate things about Father Gruner not making it last night, Father Gruner was supposed to be here. He was also bringing with him 50 copies of this book. Well, since he didn't come, the 50 copies didn't come. So, therefore, we're going to try to find a way to make some copies anyway today to give to you. So we have the lack of the priest and the lack of the copies. So we'll try to get that too, which has some of these quotes. And Father, going to take over and go through some of the quotations. Sure. Yes.
So we saw yesterday, it's not just rumor and cyber gossip. These errors that we're combating are right from the documents, just like Vatican II and all the reforms came from the ambiguous documents of Vatican II, a Masonic tactic. So the ambiguity in the documents, which we saw the first one yesterday, which was the general chapter statement. Father Pfeiffer developed the point on the paragraph that fails to mention the twofold magisterium, the two magisteria that we're dealing with now since the crisis. Anybody remember what they are? We're hearing now the magisterium of the church visible is the Catholic Church with the Pope, the bishops, hierarchy. We, the SSPX, are not in union under the Pope, therefore we got to get back in to be Catholic. So if there's only one magisterium, that is Vatican II, and in the light of tradition, then of course we're outside the church and we have to get back in. But where's the failure of distinction? What's the distinction the Archbishop Lefebvre always gave? Anybody remember? Just think of the first paragraph of the 1974 Declaration. We cleave with all our heart to eternal Rome, Catholic Rome of all time. That's what we are. If you have the faith, you're not outside the church. Was St. Athanasius outside the church when he was excommunicated by Pope Liberius? No. It was an unjust, unlawful, null and void. So the eternal Rome, we adhere with all our heart to eternal Rome, and we refuse modernist Rome, the conciliar Rome. So Father Pfeiffer developed that yesterday. So that's in the general chapter statement. The error of the only one magisterium. When we're dealing with two, and the Archbishop was very clear about this. And that's why Father Ortiz has a great 9 points, which all of you should really look into and read carefully, as he develops this quite well. That the visible, we're not visibly under the Pope, but we're under the Pope of tradition. As soon as this Pope comes back to tradition, or the next one, there won't even need to be an agreement. We fall right in, because he'll have the faith, we have the faith, no problem. But as long as he does not hold the Catholic faith and tradition, we cannot. We recognize him as Pope, obviously, but we cannot follow him into error. We will lose our faith, lose our souls. Second thing we saw was the 6 conditions. We saw that briefly yesterday, and we'll try to get a copy of that to you. It is studied in depth in this book. It's this Operation Suicide. It's a very good book because it's all the documents. Because one of the attacks against the resistance is, oh, you're all just based on gossip and rumor and misinterpreting and exaggerating Bishop Follet's mistakes. But here, this is cold cold beef, potatoes, and wine. There's not much sugar. It's just the cold documents, right from Bishop Fillet, right from Rome, right from Archbishop Lefebvre, right from Bishop Galaretta. And it's very, very good. And it's just... So what I'd like to cover with this, and Father Pfeiffer will probably pop in too sometime, is some of the objections. So we saw the general chapter statement. It's really in the documents, this change of doctrine, this change of position towards Rome. And it's not rumor, it's really there. Anybody remember the sentence, the deadly sentence in here?
We hope so.
We approve, we determine and approve with the essential conditions, the eventual
Canonical agreement.
canonical normalization is the exact word, which is the same as practical agreement, legalization, recognition, or canonical normalization. So that's right in the text. The 6 conditions we saw yesterday are very flimsy. Being willing to put all our houses, our brothers, sisters, priests, and faithful under the local diocesan bishop. Remember the Redemptorists from Scotland? Remember their great paper, The Catholic, that went all over the world? And they used to come and give missions. They didn't have to call up the Bishop of Spokane to ask permission to give a mission at Post Falls. And these missions were fruitful. They preached, the style of St. Alphonsus Liguori. And they were very fruitful. Well, when they made the agreement with Rome, they're straitjacketed and duct taped. And now, this last August 15th, they came under the local diocesan bishop. They were put under the bishop. So, all their battle for Catholic tradition has all been compromised because they made the agreement with Rome. So now they have legalization, but what are they doing for the kingship of Christ? What are they doing for the salvation of souls now? So this is the traps. These are the traps that are built into this. And this is what why the resistance is rising, why we have to resist, because all these are it's just all losing your faith legally. It's like a legal apostasy. And one thing at the foundation of all these, we always got to keep in mind, this is the heart of the fight right here. The Holy Roman Catholic faith. What is the faith? What is the faith? Is it an internal feeling? As Bishop Williamson used to say, he used to call them NIFs, N-I-F. A nice internal feeling. Is that what the faith is? That is the modernist definition of the faith. And Archbishop Lefebvre described in Father Dorman's book, with Pope John Paul II, and the same as with this Pope, they really believe the Blessed Trinity developed later, the doctrine on the Blessed Trinity, and only a couple centuries after Christ. And because it fit the need for Christianity. And the doctrines of the faith just come from the internal. So if this Pope, in all his modernism, really believes, as the Vatican II says, that all the different religions are different expressions of the same Holy Spirit, then Assisi makes sense. Then to what Catholic tradition in the super ecumenical church makes sense. It makes sense that he wants us back in. Because we, in the modernist way of thinking, you have the thesis and antithesis. You have the Hegelian dialectic. So the ultra-progressives push for altar girls and communion in the hand. And the ultra-conservatives, the traditional Catholics, don't want to move that way, and they want to keep tradition. So in the modernist framework, as St. Pius X well described in Pascendi, they see this as necessary to bring about the clash which develops into a new, for example, a perfect example, which we're on the verge of right now. You got the progressives who want the new Mass. That can't be new enough. You got the traditionalists who don't want to change the Mass. But this necessary conflict brings out what's going to come out this summer under this Pope, the hybrid Mass, which is the union of the traditional Mass and the new Mass, and it's going to bring up this new and wonderful development of the Holy Spirit. And that's deadly. So we always got to come back to this. What is the faith? What unites us to Christ? It's the faith of all time, which doesn't come from inside. The faith is the submission of the intellect prompted by grace, the will moved by grace, submitting to what God has revealed. That's the faith. And it is unity in the same doctrine. It is the true unity. Unity in belief, or the expression of the faith. Unity in the government under the Pope. Unity in same sacrifice of the Mass. And unity in the seven sacraments. And that is that's the definition in the Catechism of the Church. The unity of the believers in the faith, the Catholic faith of tradition, based on revelation. So, all this push for unity with modernist Rome, does Rome today have the same doctrine and the same faith? Is this Pope promoting the same traditional Catholic faith of all time? You tell me. No? That's easy. That's a mockery to the first commandment. And there's a whole list, and all his heretical books that he wrote as a priest are still being pushed, printed, and taught in modernist seminaries. Has he recanted them? Has he burned them all? No. Yes?
I have a question about the hybrid Mass. Is this Mass, what place is this Mass going to have? Is it possible that they will put away the ordinary form of the Mass and the extraordinary form of the Mass and replace it completely with this hybrid Mass?
We'll see. I mean, you never know what the modernists are capable of. But this might be called the superordinary Mass.
Because it seems like with just that fact that they're going to bring out another Mass, that could be yet another huge, well, it already will be, but it could be even a bigger threat than a lot of people think to the SSPX joining with Rome.
And many think, most will think it's a great thing, because it's combining both worlds. And
I think Benedict XVI thinks that it was a mistake to so quickly do the Novus Ordo. So his idea is incremental change. So
yes,
you'll
that's
probably
true.
see the 62 missal incrementally changed, and then we've seen some incremental changes in the Novus Ordo, and then over time, over maybe 20 years, then there'll be little difference between.
Yes.
There was an article in Catholic Family News that talked about the hybrid Mass, and it talked about the Pope stating that they started all over again, they would have changed the Mass over 20 years.
Yes.
And the slowness would have gotten it all, kept it all together. Okay.
Yeah, that's another thing behind this. These principles have changed in the General Chapter and Sixth Conditions. To see that. But in fact, a revolution has taken place, which is shifting from doctrine first, the faith first, over unity, to unity over faith. And this is what we're covering now. Are we united with Rome in doctrine and the faith? Well, when Rome and the Pope speak traditionally, of course. But when they're speaking as modernists, we must refuse. The government, well, we recognize we're under the same Pope, visible head. but we reject his errors and we cannot follow him. It's like the president is president, he's a so-and-so, we all know that, but he's still president. So we acknowledge his authority, but we can't follow him in his perversion. Are we united with Rome in the same sacrifice? Does Rome have the same sacrifice as the Mass? Modernist Rome? Absolutely not. So how can there, and sacraments? Do we have the sacrament of reconciliation? Are you going to sit down with Father Pfeiffer face to face and discuss your sins? No, you kneel down as a penitent. That's what confession is. You go to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and you accuse yourself. So they have gutted out the meanings of the sacraments, as Pius X said they would. Keep the same label on the pill bottle, but fill it with a different poisonous content. So I ask you, are we united with Rome, modernist Rome, in any of these? Other than the distinctions we just made. We're not. So how can there be a practical agreement with men who don't even hold these, and not only just don't hold them, they're positively destroying and wrecking the Mass, the sacraments, the faith. And positively, most bishops in the world, they don't have the faith. They don't even have it. And priests. There are many that do. In spite of Novus Ordo, in spite of the modernist Rome. But as a whole, modernist Rome, this is why Archbishop Lefebvre said there can never be a practical agreement unless it's built on the true faith of tradition, the Catholic faith of all time. And that's what we got to have clearly in our minds. No agreement until Rome converts to tradition. Review the great 1988 consecration sermon. You can look that up, the 1988 consecration sermon of Archbishop Lefebvre. You can see it live and hear the translation. And 3 times in that sermon he says it. We refuse any agreement with Rome until Rome comes back to tradition. 3 times, and he repeats it ad nauseam, really. So let's cover a few objections. One of them comes up quite often, and it's very deceiving. And that is, but Archbishop Lefebvre, he signed most of the documents of Vatican II. So what's wrong? What's wrong with Bishop Fillet saying 95% of Vatican II is acceptable, since Archbishop Lefebvre said, well, it's not all, not all the documents are bad. He said that in the 60s, Archbishop Lefebvre. He said it even in the 70s. So what's wrong with, the society working out these surmountable obstacles to an agreement with Rome? And Vatican II can be dealt with, and just see everything in the light of tradition. And the answer to that is, as one of our fellow priests in the Resistance made a very good point, let's just take a 9th grade wrestler. He's wrestling in 9th grade. He develops. 10th grade he gets better. He learns more moves. 11th grade he learns the moves of his enemies. And by 12th grade he's ready to graduate into better wrestling, let's just say. Archbishop Lefebvre wrestled with the modernists, the beasts. Cardinal Ratzinger, Cardinal Casaroli, Pope John Paul II. He dealt with them face to face. And in wrestling with this slick dragon, he learned, by the end of his life, in his last conference, 1990, he has a great conference, which is available, it's out there, and it's called 2 years after the consecration. 2 years after. 2 years after the consecration. Now, he will die in 91, March 25th, a significant date. but this is even less than a year before he dies. Here's what he says. It's very important to bring this back to people who always say, well, Archbishop Lefebvre accepted part of the council. He said later in his life, he said, the more I study the documents of Vatican II, the more here's his words, and these words were actually quoted to Bishop Follet by the three bishops. Here he says, the more one analyzes the documents of Vatican II and their interpretation by the authorities of the Church, including this Pope, and the more one realizes that they are neither superficial errors, now open brackets, this is not in here, but superficial errors, I don't know if you've been following, but that's been a lot on the SSPX website. That this Giardini, this new critique on Vatican II, he calls it superficial errors. And that's become the Society's new attack on Vatican II, that it's just superficial errors. But it's not. Here's Archbishop Lefebvre saying it's not just superficial, nor a few particular errors, such as ecumenism, religious liberty, collegial structure. That's what he always did say. He always attacked those. But now he says, in my old age, after wrestling with this dragon, I come to see, here it is, but rather it is, Vatican II, is a total perversion of the spirit, a whole new philosophy founded upon subjectivism. It is very serious, a total perversion that is really alarming. So Archbishop Lefebvre at this conference, he says all of Vatican II, the whole thing is based on subjectivism, modern philosophy, which is condemned by the Pius X, the Pope of tradition, and the whole thing is perverse. The whole thing is deeply perverse because it's based on that. And what is this modern subjectivism? Is that the faith comes from within. Faith comes from within. While the Catholic, and that's why, since the faith comes from within, then any expression of the faith fits the picture. Any revelation of the Holy Spirit through other religions is included. It's all inclusive in the Vatican II supra-ecumenical church. It makes sense. That's why it makes sense that Pope Benedict XVI wants tradition in, because he accepted the Anglicans a couple of years ago. Did they have to renounce their errors? Did they have to make a public abjuration of their heresies? No. They just had to make a vague profession of faith. And but it fits his new philosophy. But for the Catholic, this is a very simplistic way, but there's a lot more to it. But it's not that difficult. The will receives from God, and the mind is illumined by God's grace and the study of the faith. We study the faith, that is, Scripture and tradition, summarized in your catechism. You read that. Faith comes by reading, it comes by hearing, says St. Paul. But you study the faith, you study what God has revealed. God moves the will, and the mind, moved by grace, submits to what God has revealed. So God gives it. Credo in nunum Deum, which is in the accusative, which means it's an act of faith that takes you right into God. While for the modernists, it's just, subjective. There's a little more to it with this Pope. It's a little more complicated, but I'm not going to go into that here. So that's the first objection. Here's another objection. I'm sure you've heard this one. Question to Archbishop Lefebvre. Some people say, yes, but Archbishop Lefebvre should have accepted an agreement with Rome. I'll put this to now. Bishop Follet should accept an agreement with Rome. Why? Because once the Society of St. Vincent had been recognized, and the suspensions lifted, he would have been able to act in a more effective manner inside the church. Whereas now he has put himself outside. Now, have you heard that recently? It's even in that letter, the response to the three bishops. We should get into the church. And I've heard this from many good priests of the society. Why do you want to fight from the gutters when you want to go face to face and we can convert Rome? We can get inside the church and work on the bishops, work on the fellow priests, work on and convert from within. Anybody see? I mean, do you agree with that? Should we do that? What's wrong with it? Sounds great. Sounds apostolic even.
Like a bad apple. It's like a bad apple that ruins the rest of the good. You want to put yourself in with the bad apple? I don't know.
Yeah.
Not me.
It's backwards. We're not the principal. The Pope is the principal. So he's going to create the effect. We are not a principal, so we do not create the effect. We are the effect. So we have, what we can control is the principle that we choose to place ourselves under. Unfortunately, it's not in persons anymore, except for our camaraderie and the authority of you priests, but it's in the faith. Now it's in the raw faith. That's the principle.
That's well said.
The subjects,
Well said.
the subject, the superior makes the subjects don't make the superior.
Yes. Yep. Here it is. You're hitting on all of it. And here's what the Archbishop says. It's very applicable to now. Such things are easy to say. This is Archbishop Lefebvre in 1989 in the interview with the Telegram magazine. To stay inside the church or to put oneself inside the church, what does that mean? Firstly, what church are we talking about? And respond with that. When people say, well, we got to get inside the church. Well, tell them Father X, Y, or Z, or your cousin, or tell them, well, what church are you talking about? If it's the conciliar church, we're going to be destroyed. And if it's a Catholic church, well, the Pope's not even got the faith. So how can there be a union with one that doesn't even have the faith? I read on. Firstly, what church are we talking about? If you mean the conciliar church, then we who have struggled against the council for 20 years, now 42, because we want the Catholic Church, we would have to re-enter this conciliar church in order supposedly to make it Catholic. That is a complete, anybody fill in the blank?
Line of bull crap.
That's the Kentucky way of saying it. Illusion. Archbishop Lefebvre, let's get inside. Archbishop Lefebvre says, no, that is illusion. Why? Now you're talking, this is Archbishop Lefebvre, apostolic delegate to Dakar, Africa. He met with Pius XII. He was Superior General of the largest missionary order in the whole Catholic world. You don't think he knew what it was like dealing with superiors and subjects and the whole politics within the politics? And I don't mean politics in the bad sense. I mean, there is politics which is honest dealing with people. You have to deal with that everywhere you go in this life. Why is it a complete illusion? He says, it is not the subjects that make the superiors, but the superiors who make the subjects. So if we put ourselves in agreement with men who do not hold the faith, and in fact are wreckers of the faith, sure, we might have our pocket, SSPX recognition in pocket, but it's not going to last too long. St. Peter's Society, I told you this before, they elected Father Busy. Rome stepped in at their general chapter, at their election, and said, no, we want this wet noodle. And he was put in charge, and St. Peter's went swiftly into the new Mass. Even though all their priests don't say it, nor many of them accept it, but now they can't preach against it because many of their own members say it and promote it. So to seek our own pocket is also not the mind of Archbishop Lefebvre. And that's another objection you hear. Well, we should be recognized out of justice. We've been excommunicated all these years. Let's have justice done. All right, so we get our name, we get our justice, we get our legalization. But what's that do for the whole church? The church is still on fire. The house is still on fire. We might have our own room and closet. And that's the mind of the Archbishop, we have to fight for the whole faith, the whole church. And that's his great apostolic mind. And that's where he picks up the sword of combat. We must combat the errors destroying Mother Church. And not just be happy with having a healthy finger when the whole body is diseased with cancer. We have to fight that the whole body gets healthy. That is the whole Roman Catholic Church, Mother Church, the spouse, the bride of Christ. So he says here it's a complete illusion because of that great principle. It's not the subjects that make superiors. It's not the kids that make mom and dad. It's mom and dad that form the children. It's the men on top that form us. So if we put ourselves under men who are destroying the faith, we're not going to last long. And that's what Dom Thomas Aquinas in Brazil, he's a great priest. Thank God for him. He was pressured 2 years ago by Menzingen to retire. I only found that out recently. And in hindsight, now you know why. Because Father Thomas Aquinas stood strong when his abbot, Dom Gerard in France, made the agreement with Rome. He did not go with it, and Brazil had held strong. And in 2002 and 3, when Campos fell to a compromise with Rome, who held strong? Father Thomas Aquinas. Our monastery will not go with this. And now, who's been speaking out and publicly putting out letters? Father Thomas Aquinas against this new agreement with Rome. And so now he's just doing what he's always done. Thank God. But it's the society, SSPX, that is changing position. And that's scary because now recently, I'm just told the recent Angelus article has the General Chapter statement and a bunch of articles saying, even mentioning the two magisterium. So in a way, right now, because of the resistance, they're coming out with the old SSPX teachings more and more recently. But don't fall for it until they put the conditions out the window where they belong and put the General Chapter statement back to at least the one of 2006. And you could write to Bishop Fillet, tell him that. We love the SSPX, we want to stand behind you, but get rid of these two things, straighten it out, and then we'll believe all your talk about there's no agreement that's going to happen. And here's the rest of what he says. So let's get inside the church. No, it's an illusion. Why? Because subjects don't make the superiors, superiors make the subjects. And he goes on here. Amongst the whole Roman Curia, amongst all the world's bishops who are progressives, I would have been completely swamped. I would have been able to do nothing. I could have protected neither the faithful nor the seminarians. So this touches on the three surrenders. We make an agreement with Rome, you surrender major decisions of the SSPX to the Pope. And is the Pope going to support the Catholic tradition and the combat against modernism? No, not now, when he's doing it himself. It's easy. We're going to also surrender the election leaders. They stepped in and put their own man in. And then for future bishops, who will be the bishops? It's going to be Rome that decides. And if you remember, that was the wrestling match with Rome and Archbishop Lefebvre. Give me a bishop. And you had to make it clear, one of our bishops. So I know that Catholic tradition will continue. And Rome, Cardinal Ratzinger, kept playing ball and pool and sneaky moves And he said, these men are not honest. We cannot deal with them. Another objection is, aren't you afraid that in the end, when the good Lord will have called you to him, speaking to Archbishop Lefebvre, little by little the split will grow wider, and we will find ourselves being confronted with a parallel church alongside what some call the visible church. So aren't you afraid, and this is a Bishop Fillet addressed to the three bishops as well, aren't you afraid of the schismatic mentality? The longer this goes on, the more schismatic mentality we're going to become. Well, not if you teach your children the crisis, not if you teach them the catechism, not if we have to deepen our understanding of what we're fighting for.
Seems like that soundbite started to come out in 2009. The soundbite on, we're getting too far away now. At some point, we're not going to be able to dock.
Right.
I'm thinking it's been going on for 3 years.
Well, longer. This is 1989, and Archbishop Lefebvre is dealing with that question. Yeah?
But the society, the shift, I know it's longer than 2009, but that's when they started putting sound bites out
Yes.
to start working the faithful around this idea. Because I remember the first time I got hit with it, and I thought, what?
Yes.
Didn't sound right.
Well, here's what he says. It's beautiful. The Archbishop is so beautiful how he answers. And this is what we got to answer ourselves. Because you're going to hear this also. You're being schismatic. Resistance are practical sedevacantes. We haven't changed. Bishop Williamson is not a practical sedevacantist. This has always been the SSPX position. And here it is. This talk about the visible church on the part of Dom Gerard and Mr. Madiran is childish. It is incredible that anyone can talk of the visible church, meaning the conciliar church, as opposed to the Catholic Church, which we are trying to represent and continue. I am not saying that we are the Catholic Church. I have never said so, SSPX. No one can reproach me with ever having wished to set myself up as a pope. But we truly represent the Catholic Church, such as it was before, because we are continuing what it always did. It is we who have the four marks of the visible church. One, Holy Catholic Apostolic. That is what makes the visible church. So again, he comes back to, oh, you're being schismatic? Well, if it's schismatic against the conciliar church, yes, we are. You're rebellious against the conciliar church? Yes, we are. But the Catholic Church, one Holy Roman Catholic of tradition, we belong to with all our heart, and we'll die for it. So, now here's a few more. A few more statements. All right, let me just read this, and I'll throw it out to you. Let's see what you answer. What do you say to this? The Pope says that the Council, Vatican II, must be viewed in the large tradition of the Church, that it must be understood in the context of the Church. These are statements which we fully agree without a doubt. Should I read it again?
This is
Bishop
Fillet.
Fillet.
All right, yeah, this is Bishop Fillet in the CNS interview. But think about what he's saying. The Pope says that the Council must be viewed in the large tradition of the Church.
He's saying the Pope is the living magisterium. It's a magisterium issue. The question is, what now? It's a definitive issue on what's the magisterium. We're moving away from the traditional definition, and we're moving into the Vatican II,
Yes.
which recalls those 5 conditions that they tried to hit you guys with several years ago, one of which was explicitly that you had to adhere to the living magisterium. There was a little crisis
Yep.
in the SSPX those years ago,
Yes.
5 years ago maybe.
Yes. I don't, that, and I read on, that it must be understood in the context of the church. These are statements with which we fully agree without a doubt. That's called ambiguous language. Ambiguous, and here's another one. Many people understand wrongly the council. The council presents a religious freedom that is or religious liberty, that is a freedom that is very, very limited. Now, what did Archbishop Lefebvre say about religious liberty? And here it's very clear, because Menzingen tried to justify this a couple weeks ago, saying that, no, Bishop Fillet meant only religious liberty in the United States in a very limited context. But here's the text. And if you hear it, he's very clear. He's talking about the religious liberty of the council. And what does Archbishop Lefebvre say about the religious liberty of the council?
Radical.
Is it just a super heresy?
It's a veritable apostasy, right?
Yeah. Veritable apostasy, perversion, total insanity. He's quoting the popes who condemned false religious liberty. So it's not just very, very limited. This is very, very serious language here. And that, I repeat for the 100th time, for a society priest to talk ambiguously on matters of doctrine, it's like a Navy SEAL soldier going into his mission with a squirt gun. He cannot be doing that. He knows that he's not supposed to be doing that. And we have been trained to battle modernism, and we all know that one of the modernist great tactics is ambiguous language. A sentence or phrase that can be taken in 2 ways. Again, the famous one in Vatican II. There's many of them, but here's just one. Vatican II declares that Latin is to remain the language of the church. Next paragraph. However, when bishops see fit, they may use the vernacular. There you have a built-in contradiction, a built-in ambiguity, and what happened after the council? You still have Latin? And now Latin's only coming back. It's being like salt sprinkled on many parish liturgies throughout the world, along with Pro Multis and the Lord be with you and with thy spirit, now they've gone back to. It's all this appearance of becoming more traditional and more conservative. And that's even more deadly because Catholics are getting, traditional Catholics are getting sucked into this idea that, well, this Pope is really traditional.
More ambiguity.
Yes, and if you read what Father Laguerre said, Father Laguerre, in 2005, he founded Father Olanier, the Good Shepherd Institute. And they really believed, with the election of Pope Benedict XVI, that we now have a traditional Pope. And he said, Bishop Fillet cannot justify his position anymore. Bishop Fillet expelled him because why? He wanted an agreement with Rome. It's true. Bishop Fillet was holding strong for some years. And he expelled them because they wanted to go with Rome. And he said, no, this is dangerous to the faith. And now, the very arguments that they were using is now the arguments he's using and the leaders of the society to go in with Rome. I read on, here's another one. After the discussions, we found out that the errors that we believe were sourced from the council, in fact, are not sourced from the council, but result from the general interpretation which has been made. So, what's that do to the Archbishop of If the errors we're combating are not really from the council, then we're wasting our time. And It's the council errors, the errors right in the Vatican II documents that are the poison. So these are just a few of the common objections. What about you? Have you heard any, in all this recent crisis, have you heard any objections that you might want to repeat that maybe Father Pfeiffer and I, Father Voigt, might be able to help iron out?
Father?
Yes.
This is not exactly an answer to the question, but it's an observation. You have people like Gherardini coming on the scene now, and
Yes.
we're all supposed to run towards him because he sounds a little bit like we do. What we've lost is our principle of all or nothing. We've lost that principle of if there's even a little bit of a taint, you have to throw the whole thing out. We've lost that understanding now, and so we tend to run like cattle. We ran in 2007 when the Pope supposedly freed the Mass. We ran when he supposedly lifted the excommunication. We keep running to a sound that sounds like us, but it's not us.
Yes.
So we're misidentifying with things that we should not identify, and then once we misidentify it, then we want to unite with it.
Yes. Gardini, he's the one that calls, and it's been showing up a lot in our SSPX website.
Yes.
He's quoted a lot because he's the one that says Vatican II has superficial errors. But I just read to you Archbishop Lefebvre saying, wait a minute, it's not just superficial errors. The errors are serious, they're deep, and they totally pervert all the documents of the Council. You follow?
Yeah.
So, Gardini is the one that is saying that. Plus, what I think you're hitting on is Father Chazelle speaks about this, Bishop Williamson speaks about it, any good Cardinal P, Louis Voyot, these great anti-liberals, they describe a liberal is one who wants to feel part of the unity, let's just say, whatever the unity is. A liberal in his heart wants to feel part of the gang. In a way, it's kind of part of nature. It's part of fallen nature, and it's even on the noble side of nature. It's a good thing. But the liberal wants unity at pretty much any cost. But the Catholic liberal wants to unite the modern world principles with the church. And that's what's deadly. And that's in the council itself. Gaudium et Spes says the church must adapt the modern principles to deal with the modern problem. And that's deadly. So a liberal wants to feel united, and that's part of the problem. We feel like since there's a new definition of the visibility of the church, which is to be under the Pope, and the lack of distinction of the two magisterial, the conciliar church and the eternal Rome, the Roman Catholic Church of tradition. We refuse the conciliar church and want to be eternally under eternal Rome. But since this distinction now is not made anymore, and you don't hear anymore about the conciliar church from the leadership, all you hear about is we got to belong to Rome, be under the Pope. So it makes sense in that picture that, hey, if we're outside the church, we want to be united to it. We don't want to become schismatics, obviously. And it's an error in the thinking, and it's a bit too much mush in the heart, I suppose. I mean, the liberal Catholic, as Pius IX said, he wants to feel united with the world. And now the SSPX wants to feel united with Rome. But which Rome? And this is where Bishop Fillet, maybe by a miracle, he has to come back. And if he doesn't, SSPX is done. It's in trouble. But to seek this agreement with Rome, when it's not a unity on the faith, is just deadly. And that's liberal Catholicism. That's exactly what it is. While the true unity, of course, is you see the truth and you're united to the Catholic truth of all time because it is precisely the Catholic tradition. So those are just a few objections that I wanted to cover. And then you're going to hear many more, and many more will come up. Yes, sir.
I've heard our current situation being likened to the semi-Arianism of all areas.
Yes.
St. Basil in that time period,
Yes.
where there was a period with like a transition from Arianism to restoration of the church. There was a semi-Arianism
Yes.
period. Have you heard that objection?
Yes. Do you mean Father Iscara's?
I don't know where it comes
His
from.
argument?
Yeah, Father Scott.
Iscara's argument? Well, Bishop Tissier, he blasted that one out of the water in his sermon this past summer. But I think the better example is St. Athanasius, because he was in that period also. And Pope Liberius signed the semi-heretical document, semi-Arianism. And he signed it because it sounded good. It could be interpreted Catholic way. But he's the first pope to not be sainted. And Athanasius, of course, was excommunicated, exiled 5 times, had to run for his life many times. You know the famous story of when he was dressed up, hiding on the dock, waiting for the monks to come down the Nile River to pick him up and take him into exile. And the soldiers of the emperor were chasing him down. And they came running down the beach. They came out on the dock. They saw this man, bearded man, dressed up in a fisherman's clothes. And they said, "Have you seen Bishop Athanasius? Where is he? Have you seen him?" And St. Athanasius, he looked up the river, he looked down the river, and he said, "Well, he's not, I haven't seen him, but look down that way, maybe you'll find him. But he's not far off," he says. So they took off, and the monks came and picked him up. And he was in exile there for 6 years. So, yeah, I think it's a fair comparison. We are in a new phase of the revolution. Because after Vatican II, you had it's like the rock and roll revolution. The long hair, cut-up blue jeans, bell-bottoms, the whole horrible scene, Woodstock. It's absolutely repulsive. And they glorify that today, Woodstock. You had the French Revolution, the blood, the guillotine, the bloodshed, the mess. Vatican II, the smashing of the altars, smashing the communion rails, nuns and priests exodusing. You had the big crash, just say, right after these revolutions. And after the French Revolution, then came Napoleon, and Napoleon established the principles of the modern world with a suit and tie on. Obama is the perfect expression of what's going on now in the church. The guy is a total revolution. He's opening the persecution on the Catholic Church in this country. You would expect such a guy to have long afro hair and earrings all over the place, tattoos everywhere, cut-up jeans and t-shirt, and smoking marijuana. That's what you would expect, but he's not. He's clean cut, shaven, suit and tie. That is the revolution we are dealing with in the church. Now, Pope Benedict XVI is Vatican II. He is modernist. He is our Pope, and I pray for him. But he doesn't have the rainbow vestments. He's not out there saying, restoring some conservative thing. It's very deceptive. And a lot of Catholics, including, sadly, our own superiors in the society, are being duped by this. It looks traditional, but it's not. And it's, in the rock and roll music, it's, the rock and roll musicians that are singing revolution, promoting all kinds of vice, but they're dressed casually and they're not all that wild on the outside. So this is that conservative revolution that we are in now. We are in this stage. And that's why we have to resist this crushing of our Catholic faith, endangering the Catholic faith, brought about by this General Chapter statement pushing for the agreement. It approves it, it determines to go for it. And we have to refuse that, because we know what that means. We will lose our faith, we will lose the Mass, we will lose the priesthood, the sense of the priesthood. So, anyway, I guess that's long enough.
Yeah, we better take a little break here. But I think the objection that he was referring to was the Father Oscar argument, which was, about the dealing with the heretics gently and in a conciliatory way, and not being too negative with them, so that you can win them through honey, so to speak, and bring them one step. Yeah, just for the silence. The one about the silence, and so bring them over slowly towards the tradition, and rather than hit them with a sledgehammer.
That's exactly it.
Yeah,
exactly what I've
that's
heard.
it. That's Father Oscar's argument. That's up to his asking the answer to. Is you need to answer that. What's the answer to that?
Well, Bishop Tissier, he did touch on that in his sermon in the summer in St. Nicolas de Chardonnay. He did mention that. But like I said, we have the example in St. Athanasius in that same period of time. Did he think that way? Did he think...
The argument is that St. Basil thought that way. That's his argument.
Right.
St. Basil tried that, the peaceful approach. And so that's the objection, is the answer, is that they, to make a statement that could be gently bring them over.
Right. Well, St. Basil, he was in the East, and he knew St. Athanasius was preaching. He knew other saints at the time, St. Eusebius of Samosata, St. Hilary of Poitiers. There were numerous saints at that time who were openly preaching against Arianism. So maybe he could justify himself, because he was actually founding monasteries, St. Basil. He was writing a rule for monks. So that might have been more his focus, but how can we say? Since the other dogs were barking against the wolves, he could focus on building, the monastic fortress.
Well, the truth is St. Basil did bark against the wolves. One famous story of the St. Basil example is that one of the Arians was, the Arian king St. Basil was known for being a nice, gentle individual, and one of the Arians, said some semi-Arian type things, and St. Basil stood up and blasted him, and he just attacked him, and it wasn't a king, it was like a duke or whatever, it was not the emperor, but it was a lower official. And he said, "Boy, I can't believe you did that." And he goes, and it was, "Yes, because you have stood up," and St. Basil said to him, "You have faced many and knocked them down, but you have not, now you see what it is to stand against a bishop of the church." And Basil blasted him. The argument that Basil didn't do that is actually not really accurate. And that's what, and Bishop Tissier pointed that out in his sermon on June 17th. He mentioned specifically St. Basil. And he said that St. Basil attacked the heretics. St. Basil did not try, and he attacked clearly the heresy. And then, and also as an answer to that, one of the Filipino priests, Father Suelo in the Philippines, when we read that back, I was in the Philippines at the time when that document came out, and Father Suelo says, even if it was, let's suppose that it was true, that St. Basil said, wrote something which would have possibly two different interpretations, or which would be nice to them. At that time, people had a brain, and they knew there was only one truth, and and that there was only one clear truth, and St. Basil was promoting that clear truth. They knew where he stood, and that he was promoting the clear Catholic doctrine. There was no doubt about where St. Basil stood. There was no confusion as to St. Basil's teaching. And just that, sometimes you hit a guy with a sledgehammer, and sometimes, you just gently hit him with a boxing glove. So that even if it was true at that time, the Arians knew, they were Arians, they knew that Basil was Catholic, and they knew that they were enemies on doctrine. But nowadays, people don't believe in truth. Nowadays, people don't know that there is a such thing as truth. And so if the new Basil doesn't tell them clearly that they're wrong, and that this error is wrong, they'll say, oh, well, Basil changed his mind. Basil's not Catholic anymore. And that's what's happening now. See, right now, the majority of Catholics, I've spoken to many of them, bishops, priests, one priest I spoke to who says a Latin Mass in Connecticut, he says, hey, I heard you guys are making a deal with the church. Welcome to home sweet Rome. And I said, actually, you're talking to the wrong guy. I'm one of the guys that, tell that to the guy up the road, but I'm not the one you should be telling that. And they go, oh, okay. And then but a lot of the 1 billion Catholics, they see that the present reunion of the church, read the Wall Street Journal, read what the Catholic newspapers are saying and what the people think. Society is coming back from excommunication to back to the church. The society is returning to Rome. They're not saying the Pope is coming to tradition. The Pope is becoming Catholic. That's not what they're saying. So it's going to cause grave confusion, just like the case of not Mattathias, in the book of Eleazar, in the book of Maccabees. Where in the book of Maccabees, Eleazar was an old man. He was told to eat, pork, which of course is against the law of God, law of the Jews. He said no, so they're going to kill him. But they were very happy, they were impressed that this 80-year-old man was being so strong. And so they said, hey, we like you. So I'll tell you what, we're going to give you chicken. And we're going to tell the young men that you ate pork. So that way you're not breaking the law of God. And he said, if I were to eat chicken, it would be a scandal. Because even though I'm not eating pork, the young men will think that me, an old wise man, is eating pork, and I will scandalize them, and they will turn from God. And besides, it is not worthy of my gray hairs. I'm going to die anyway. Might as well be today. So he said it's called simulation. That he refused, even though technically he was going to be eating chicken. So he was technically martyred because he wouldn't eat chicken. But he was martyred because even though he had no problem eating chicken, he probably had some for breakfast that morning. It was the fact that they would believe that he was eating pork, and the fact that they believed was sufficient for him to say no. And in the church today, one of the arguments and why it's important for us to stand up, we are endangering the faith of those who would come to Catholic tradition. We're endangering their faith. There are many souls who would come to us. 2009 was a big difference from 1988. In 88, the Archbishop and the priests of the society stood up and they said, excommunicate us too. How come you only excommunicated 6? We feel left out. And so they wrote letters, please excommunicate me, excommunicate me, excommunicate me, because I feel left out, I'm hurt. That's what they wrote. And what happened? There was a massive growth of Catholic tradition. Because the people knew the Pope is condemning tradition, these are standing for tradition, I want to be traditional. One of them was Father Bebo, who was at that time thinking of leaving the priesthood. He couldn't take the new Mass. He couldn't take it anymore. He was trying to say the Indult Mass once in a while, and he was taking a job as a night watchman. He said, I'm going to have to leave the priesthood. And then he saw on the news, excommunicated Archbishop, and he said, if he's excommunicated, he can't be that bad. And now he's been taking care of our parish for 20 years. And I lived with him for 9 years. And so it was one example, many others. In 2009, when we had the condemnation of Bishop Williamson, and what happened was, he's a Holocaust denier. So the world condemned him. And then, the lesbian Merkel condemned him. And then the Pope condemned him. And then Bishop Follet condemned him. And the society condemned him. So there weren't two sides. As a result, it only caused harm. Had he been defended, then many people would have converted at that time. Because they would see clearly there are two sides. It was the first major fight in which there were not two sides. Before 2009, whenever there was a fight, it's us against them. In 2009, the Pope, left hook. Bishop Fillet, right hook. We're working together against a common enemy. That's what happened. And next thing you know, we become friends. Just like on Good Friday morning, Pilate and Herod, who were enemies of each other, became friends. And that is what really began to happen in 2009.
Well, what's the first sentence of the CNS interview?
I don't see it that way, a fight. Bishop Fillet says that people speak about SSPX versus Rome. I don't see it that way. It's not SSPX versus Rome. Whereas Archbishop Lefebvre did see it that way. And so the conciliatory argument is causing grave harm to souls because we're making a conciliation with those who are destroying souls today. Therefore, people will think it's okay to go with them. Scandal. It's the true definition of scandal. It causes people to fall. But in any case, we should take a station break here. So we'll just take a quick prayer.